Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Carrie Oderman with UATV. Theresa May officially resigned from the post of Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now the task of leaving the EU falls on the shoulders of her successor, Boris Johnson. He will have to face a challenging mandate as the country is still struggling to find a way to leave the EU. To talk more about this, we're joined in the studio today by Julia Osmolovska, international politics expert and executive director at the Institute of Negotiations. Hello, and thank you for joining us today. What can we expect of Boris Johnson?
We can expect unexpected from Boris Johnson. So he's very famous for his quite opposite views and statements on different things. But in terms of Brexit policy, he's been straightforward and probably more definite than the others politicians who competed for this position and expressed their views of how the Brexit actually should be organized. So Boris Johnson is up to leave the EU with or without deal by the end of October this year, and he is also ready to question the issue of payback from the UK to the budget of European Union. It was like a diverse amount agreed in between the European Union and United Kingdom, and this issue is hitting the debates, but probably less than the Irish and border issue with Northern Ireland, because Boris Johnson declared that he is going to delete the backstop clause from the agreement. And I think that this creates a lot of uncertainty and a lot of worries and concerns about all of those who are within the Brexit deal, and also for those who are just observing it.
Well, you said expect the unexpected, but isn't that politics as usual right now? There's been lots of comparisons between Boris Johnson and U.S. President Donald Trump. Do you see any commonalities between the two gentlemen?
Yes, I do, and moreover, I would anticipate that the dialogue between the two countries under Boris Johnson as the head of the government of the United Kingdom will strengthen, and we'll really be talking about the transatlantic alliance of United States and the United Kingdom. Unlike something that we've experienced under Theresa May. Yes, the common thing is the unpredictability and also the readiness to play with the high stakes.
That readiness to play with high stakes makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable. Just today, we had the chance to speak with Gordon Sunderland, who is the U.S. ambassador to the EU, who happens to be in Kiev. He said he spoke with Donald Trump yesterday, and Donald Trump has given him a mandate to work closely in bringing the EU and Ukraine together. Now, the EU is also getting a lot of attention from the UK. The United States and the UK are extremely interested in the Ukraine. How should Ukraine react and play their cards right in this situation?
I think here we also could foresee a very good, very strong triangle, because judging from the statements coming from United States and United Kingdom with regard to Russian aggression and our conflict between Russia and Ukraine, both countries are quite supportive to Ukrainians' stance on issues and condemning Russians breaching the international agreements with annexation of Crimea and behaving like they do in eastern Ukraine. So I would foresee the strengthening of this stance, probably against Russia, and more sharp language. I would foresee very strong position on Boris Johnson on this issue, and partly because this is probably one of the minor issues in internal politics in UK, which actually combines both parties, Conservatives and Labours, with their common position on that issue. So therefore, I think that as well as for Theresa May, also for Boris Johnson, this issue would be quite easy to handle within the UK Parliament, unlike the Brexit one.
Now, let's compare Johnson's reaction to Russia's aggression against the Ukraine and May's. Would we say that Johnson comes out much harder than Theresa May? Is he predictable in that area?
I wouldn't say that his position on Russia is more stronger than Theresa May. Just remember the meeting of Mrs. May and Mr. Putin in the Saka summit. So a lot of photographers just commented on the pictures of her demonstrative stance and against Putin, despite they were having bilateral talks. So what was the issue of these talks at all if she expressed with all her stance that she is not going to get into some sort of compromises with Russia. So same goes for Boris Johnson. However, his statements on Russia are a bit more contradictory because from one hand, he is standing against the Russian aggression. On the other hand, he is still hoping for having some sort of talks, negotiations, and to leave the door open to have the exchange of views, at least for sharpening issues like Ukraine.
Okay, in 2014, the Normandy format was created. Just last month, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky called up Russian President Vladimir Putin and asked if he would consider expanding the format to include U.S. President Donald Trump, and at the time it was Theresa May as Prime Minister. Now it would be Boris Johnson. What's your take? Would Johnson be likely to participate in the expanded Normandy format?
My guess is yes, he would be very keen to participate, at least because UK would love to see itself as a front runner in international politics. And while she was within the EU, this role was a bit downgraded for United Kingdom. Now there is a chance for United Kingdom to play a more definite stance, and she would be ready to compete with France and Germany for this. So I would foresee that Boris Johnson would be keen to join. I'm not so much sure about United States and Donald Trump, and shouldn't we forget that Russia is also having its voice on this issue. So we should seek for Russia to be consent with the enlarged format. However, formally they said that they are not against it, but they expressed cautious concern that United States probably not very much happy about getting involved into this Normandy format. So I would foresee that the format won't enlarge for the foreseeable future.
We've been reporting that Johnson said yesterday and the day before that even though the world thinks that the UK isn't ready for a New Deal Brexit, they're better prepared than people think they are. If he goes ahead with the October 31st deadline, they're doing work in the background to make sure business as usual can continue in the United Kingdom. Has there been any evidence that you know of that the UK is reaching out to the Ukraine for economic deals or new trade agreements?
Sure. I even know that mathematical calculations and economic calculations had been done with regard to possible bilateral deal between Ukraine and the United Kingdom on free trade area. And moreover, I also know that United Kingdom is looking up to the Ukraine's association deep and comprehensive free trade agreement as Ukraine has with the European Union. So definitely there is much in common for both countries to talk about in trade terms. However, according to the rules of being EU member, you can't enter into any kind of formal negotiations unless you exit the European Union. So this is something which should be stopped for the time being until United Kingdom finally leaves the EU.
Now, the United Kingdom has a long and rich history of entering emerging markets and using them to their advantage. What would you advise Ukrainian business people and government to be wary of if the United Kingdom is showing a lot of interest to this emerging market here?
Yeah, my advice would be not only for the case of United Kingdom looking for some ways of having free trade relations with Ukraine, but for any issues of free trade agreements that Ukraine concludes with the whole world. Because you have to know econometrics, you have to calculate profits and losses, you have to calculate advantages and disadvantages, and to understand finally whether you win in this free trade agreement or you would have some sort of asymmetric benefits from these kind of agreements. So this is something that Ukrainian trade and economic team should be aware of.
Now, President Trump called President Zelensky and congratulated him to his parliamentary win. President Zelensky also congratulated Boris Johnson to becoming the Prime Minister. What do you think that conversation could have looked like between Zelensky and Boris Johnson?
I think it was quite a frank conversation, because we don't have any sensitive and stress issues on agenda. As I said, the United Kingdom is very much supportive politically and practical terms of Ukraine standing against Russia. And also, I think that Boris Johnson is thinking high of Mr. Zelensky, who, like himself, in a way, a bit odd creature in political life, but actually both of them have successful stories of becoming top people in their countries. So therefore I think that personal sympathy is definitely there.
So the sense I'm getting is we are going to have to hurry up and wait to see what happens with Brexit, but there's going to be plenty to watch along the way. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
That was Yulia Osmolovska, international politics expert and executive director at the Institute of Negotiations. Thank you for watching Head to Head. Stay tuned for more.